Now, in my update video for the Walmart XTDS update, I talked about a glitch at the very end which I had discovered revolving around the Elementalist tower. In that video, I suggested that the Elementalist tower could be a little bit broken in the fact that it actually froze enemies for a long period of time. Now, I got Mentin, in fact, well, actually, Mentin watched the video and he checked it out for himself, and he did confirm there was something fishy going on with the Elementalist and an interaction with a skill. So we're just going to display the bug. For this, we're just going to get a max level Elementalist, and then we're just going to place down a ice turret, and then all of a sudden we're going to spawn in a whole load of bullocks. Say 20 bullocks, spawn delay 1, that's fine. Spawn in all those bullocks, and then the Elementalist just frees them, right? Yes, as you can see here, it does seem to normally freeze them, and because of the skill that I have for, I think, Fight Dirty, the freeze for these enemies are going for a longer period of time than usual. However, you will notice some of these enemies are being frozen for an extremely long period of time. As you notice, that bullock was frozen for at least 5 seconds. And these bullocks here, they're being frozen for an extremely long period of time. Now, it's not actually a case where all of the bullocks are actually frozen through shots. As you can see here, these bullocks aren't being frozen by these shots. But these bullocks here, they seem to be frozen for a very, very long period of time. I'm counting at least 20 seconds for these bullocks. But then some of the bullocks towards the end, which are what these bullocks are actually, they have been unfrozen. And they can't be frozen again, at least by the same Elementalist. I assume if I place down another Elementalist, it's the same issue. Place down an ice turret there, and as you can see, they can now be frozen. In fact, I think it's the ice turret that freezes enemies, because I don't see them not being frozen outside of this. But as you can see, these bullocks are being frozen for an extremely long period of time, especially when you combine it with the ice turret. And these bullocks here have not moved. I've been recording for at least 2 minutes. They haven't moved yet. The Elementalist all of a sudden looks like a very, very good tower. All of a sudden, purely because it can... It's not perma-freeze. As you can see, the enemies do eventually get unfrozen. These bullocks have just been recently unfrozen. But they are being froze for a very, very long period of time. Granted, not a lot of damage is being done to these enemies. We're only halfway and they're only 20 bullocks. But in terms of freezing them for a long period of time, the Elementalist does indeed seem to do that. However, do bear in mind that you only can have 5 Elementalists, and I am using a max level turret, so there's probably some interaction with the max level turret, which means they get frozen for longer, but I assume it works for the lower levels of the Elementalist too. We're still currently on like 3 minutes, and this bullock has just been unfrozen. Yeah, that's how long this takes. So if I were to place down like another ice turret, yeah, as you can see, they are now frozen again. But sometimes they get out of this frozen stage and they do become unstuck. However, it's more likely than not that they actually become very close to perma-frozen. It's not permanently frozen, because obviously they still do move, and you do see some enemies that come out of this perma-freeze state. However, it's very, very close to permanently frozen. And in fact, we just killed a bullock there. So that's our first bullock killed. And this bullock isn't dying. Why isn't it dying? Okay, it just has died. Okay, I forgot. It does have a death animation. But 5 Elementalists are able to kill off all these bullocks eventually. It will take a while. And you do need the ice turret, actually, because without that, it doesn't look like they can get permanently frozen. Now, you may think, well, this is sandbox mode. Maybe this doesn't apply to regular game modes. Nope. Mentin did this in regular gameplay in Honey Valley. I believe this must be intermediate mode or casual mode. But, as you can see here, the enemies are being frozen for a long period of time because there are a lot of permanently frozen enemies. And shown off here, it is just the Elementalist and the Commander and the Brawler, but yeah, fair enough. But the Elementalist on its own, because I don't see any brawlers here apart from towards the back to clear up the mess that's made by the Elementalist, they can actually freeze enemies for a long period of time. And the Elementalist here aren't actually maxed out, so it seems like these ice turrets, for some reason, they are able to permanently freeze enemies, or something close to permanently freeze enemies. So long you have like a solid production line of ice turrets, they are able to permanently freeze enemies. Now, what Mentin has discovered is that even though it's a semi-perma freeze, it often takes longer than about 10 seconds for the next one to get unfrozen, so the longest wait times could be minutes long. I experienced nearly 10 minutes of a bullock being frozen. And this bug is not sandbox only. The requirements can be met as an Elementalist is capable of doing it in regular gameplay. However, it's not as easy because not all enemies that spawn into regular game modes are just bullocks and they have a lot of health. No, sometimes they do have a low amount of health, meaning that they can't take advantage of the permanently frozen state. Now, very interestingly, this does appear to be an Elementalist only thing. The reason why it probably took so long for this to be discovered is because the Elementalist is probably not an as-used tower as something like the Sledger, the Freezer, or the Frost Blaster in terms of freezing towers. In fact, I only use the Elementalist, and I discovered this glitch because I do discover glitches. I do report bugs on the public bug reports spreadsheet. You'll notice that I have about 200 bugs reported there. But this one is something that I purely found out for myself when testing out the Field Medic with the Elementalist Ice Turret, where the Elementalist was actually able to permanently freeze enemies. Menton speculates that this is caused by the Ice Turret and Elementalist freezing multiple enemies in quick succession due to the Fight Dirty skill being active, where debuff durations are applied to enemies are increased by 10%, but for some reason it has a weird interaction with the Elementalist Ice Turret and the Elementalist itself, where these effects last for a much longer period of time than they should be. The Elementalist has not been shown to do this without the active perk, so it does seem like you can't do, say, the Hidden Wave through this glitch. I mean, to be fair, with a Hidden Wave, you don't really want to be doing this unless it's actually the last wave. And also, because this only applies to the Elementalist freeze, if an enemy has freeze immune, such as a load of enemies in Fallen mode, but then also a lot of enemies in Hardcore mode, they can't take advantage of this. However, that still leaves a load of enemies which can take advantage of this. So for example, the Vindicator, it has no freeze immunity, so you can freeze this close to permanently through the Elementalist if you so bring it to Hardcore mode. I doubt you want to bring that to Hardcore mode. But then in terms of Polluted Wastelands 2, something like the Nuclear Guardian, that has freeze immune. Okay, so you can't use it on that. But the Necromancer King also has freeze immune. Okay, you can't use it on that one either. The Templar, however, doesn't have freeze immune. Yes, you can use it for that, which has 50,000 health in Polluted Wastelands 2. The Super Toxic does have freeze immune. Ah, right. The Abomination doesn't have freeze immune. So, the Abomination, one of the most annoying enemies in Polluted Wastelands 2, you can use the Elementalist glitch on this to permanently freeze the Abomination, at least until it goes reanimated. But then you can permanently freeze it again after it goes reanimated. But most importantly, not the first spawn, because boss enemies, they always have freeze immunity. So while this is a glitch and actually affects more enemies than the, say, the permanently stuck glitch when it comes to using the Biologist Tower or really any other Legacy Tower to the Nuclear Monster and its directed attacks, permanently freezing the Nuclear Monster, it does mean you can take advantage of it less because it only applies to weaker enemies, but you can still do it to something like the Fallen Honor Guard, which doesn't have freeze immunity. Now, is this an abusable glitch? Certainly, I think so. In certain circumstances and in certain game modes where enemies do not have freeze immunity, yes, I can see this being easily abused. In terms of Solo Polluted Wastelands 2, definitely, I think it could be abused to some extent, but I think the DPS towers and the Nuclear Monster is more of a threat than using the Elementalist on any of the weaker enemies, which may not have freeze immunity. In Hardcore mode, however, given the fact that only certain enemies do have freeze immunity, not all of them have freeze immunity, certainly the Vindicator doesn't, and I believe the Unknown doesn't, that's like two major enemies that don't have freeze immunity, I think it could be abused in such a game mode. As for the other game modes, certainly, yes, it can be abused, but you should probably have, like, say, combine this with the Mortar, which, because the enemies are frozen nearly right next to each other, the Mortar can easily clear out a load of enemies. Plus, there's also a longer period of time when the Mortar can attack enemies because it has a long-ish range. It doesn't have as long as the Ranger, but the Mortar can attack multiple enemies. As for whether the developers would fix this bug, I think they would. I mean, I have reported it, and it's technically been in the game since the skill tree has been added. However, I guess no one was using the Elementalist to actually find this out, and I've only just found out for myself right now. I mean, I have reported it on the public bug report form spreadsheet that the developers do look at, and they have looked at for fixing previous bugs. However, due to the circumstances, it's only listed as a medium priority bug, but it can be abused. And before you ask, no, it doesn't apply to any non-event tower. It is just the Elementalist. It doesn't apply to the Freezer. You can't get much use out of this when it comes to the Freezer. It's just the Fight Dirty skill having some weird interactions with the Elementalist Ice Turret. Suffice to say, this is not meant to happen. So Fight Dirty at max level only gives a 25% total increase in the amount of debuff that a tower deals to an enemy. The Ice Turret has a max slowdown of 60%, and I believe its freeze time is only 2 seconds, meaning that we should only really see a freeze time of 2.5 seconds. However, certainly when it comes to the Ice Turret, we're seeing freeze times of up to 2.5 minutes, let alone hours. I mean, I think you could genuinely get away by saying that the ice turrets could probably freeze enemies for a long period of time. Just set this time scale to like 100 and then let the game play out for 10 minutes and then continually spawn in ice turrets, and then all of a sudden, bam, yeah, the ice turret is able to freeze enemies for a very, very long period of time. Interestingly, Frost mode does have a freeze period of 2 seconds as well. However, it doesn't seem like the Frost Elementalist can do it, it's just the ice turret, at least from what I've tested. From Menton's testing, it does seem like it's a combination of both the Elementalist and the ice turret, but from what I've tested, it's the ice turret. It seems to be a very weird glitch.